So this talk is basic DevOps with Jenkins automation in an afternoon. It's aimed at not sort of the highest level of automation, but for somebody who's not using Jenkins or DevOps or so on, and getting the most bang for their buck with the easiest things to do. And it's particularly aimed at convincing people who are like, a freelancer or the main dev in a small shop, that this is something they can do, and without sinking in like weeks of investment or something, that they can do it literally in an afternoon, and that it will pay off very quickly. My name's Robert Ristroph. I work as a technical architect at Acquia, and that's my Twitter handle there also. And as I said, that link there is the Lullapad link. We can go back to it later if somebody needs it or whatever. And with that, let's go ahead and get into this. Text is a little smaller than I'd hoped, so what is DevOps? It's kind of thrown around as a buzzword a lot, and it's become, particularly in the last few years, kind of a very hyped thing. Some people are like obviously using it to promote themselves and upgrade what they can claim in salary and so on, which I'm all for, by the way, the salary side. And so you should learn how to do it too without buying into some of the more vacuous hype surrounding it. So it started out as sort of this idea that on particularly a lot of big organizations and enterprise things, there's sort of these development and operations teams or departments. They didn't talk to each other. Like development built some tool and kind of threw it over the fence into an operations department who was supposed to run it and charge people money to use it, but didn't have tight integration with the development. And there was, sort of this epiphany among a number of different people that this didn't make sense, particularly in web services, and that it really should just be all one team. Hence the Portman, the combination word there. And so there's some general principles that are actually that are actually kind of important or real, and not just buzzwords. And one of them is is people generally say automate everything that possibly can be automated, and that's not just so that you can save 5 minutes doing a deploy that you maybe only do every sprint. So that's not going to add up to any large amount of time very quickly. The reason why you do that is that you can do it the same time every time, because the time you save is undoing mistakes. It's not the doing it faster correctly. So 99% of the time you do it right by hand anyway. Maybe automating it doesn't make much sense, but if the one time you mess up, you lose a client, then automating it just so you never mess up makes sense. Another reason to automate everything is so that you can spend less time doing operation stuff and do development, which generally tends to actually pay the bills. And there's sort of this whole sort of aspect to the movement and hype around it, which is sort of anti-bureaucratic. That's because it came out of corporations that are very bureaucratic, and these people were fighting against that. At kind of our level, at the people who work at Drupal camps and so on, that's generally not that's not as big a deal. Your average Drupal shop does not have you file and carbon copy change requests to make a change on the website. And so that doesn't apply to us. I think as a Drupal community, like we've kind of ignored, for a while, we had kind of ignored DevOps because of that. And so we had kind of missed the things that made sense. And the best parts are cheap and easy to do and pay off quickly. And the things that seem like very complex and would maybe pay off only after a long time of use, like you can push those down the backlog. You should do the things that are going to pay off for you very quickly and be useful for you in your very next sprint or client or whatever. And that's the things we're going to cover. I'm going to mention fancier things and avoid getting deeply into them. Let's talk about Jenkins, the tool itself. So there's a website there, which is where the open source project is run. And it is open source, which is good. You can contribute to it. It has a pretty decent and supportive community. There's an IRC channel, of course. But it's not PHP based like Drupal. It's Java based. For most of us as a user, like that won't make much difference except for the fact that we'll see that it uses more RAM than we would expect it. You can install it from a package. You don't have to know anything about Java. And then you go to a web page to see it and interact with it. There are a lot of analogies to Drupal in that you don't have to go to a web page. It has the equivalent of drush. There's a Jenkins CLI command. And like Drupal, it has this huge ecosystem of plugins that talk to everything. And like Drupal, there's kind of a problem that some of those plugins maybe aren't that good, that a lot of them duplicate functionality in ways that are like maybe incompatible. And so just as building a Drupal site, you may spend a lot of time analyzing different modules that you want to use and selecting which one, or trying different ones and switching. That can happen with Jenkins too if you're doing anything complex. The example we're gonna go through involves a handful of plugins that are the best and most common. It's the equivalent of a Drupal site with views. And so some of its terminology comes from the fact it was originally used for what was called continuous integration. And the idea is people building desktop software that was compiled would check in their changes, and this tool would check out a copy of it and build a copy of the software for Windows, Mac, and Linux, and all the other variations, then run automatic tests and things like that. So it doesn't immediately come from the building web platforms area, but it's kind of become the default way to integrate and automate so many different things that it's been used for that very extensively. And you can find lots of examples. And just to note as a caveat, probably 80 or 90% of what I'm going to cover, you can find other ways to do it, either with your own custom scripts running from cron, which is probably a bad idea. I mentioned CloudBees there, which is a hosted Jenkins, so that you can pay a monthly fee, have somebody else running your Jenkins, and configure your jobs there. They're a little more constrained because they don't let you put just any job on their system so that you don't bring it down. And then more and more, places like where I work, Acquia, but also Pantheon, the platform.sh guys are out there. Their hosting platforms themselves contain features that are basically the most common things you would do with Jenkins. Like automatic backups is the one kind of default one, but even like running drush cron and then taking actions on promoting code between the different environments. So just a touch on some architecture and terminology and stuff. When you install Jenkins, in their documentation and so on, that's referred to as the master server. The way we'll install it, we're just going to install it once. There's not going to be very much else there. There's the web interface, and then also a CLI and a REST API. And what it calls nodes or workers are things like your web server that it can connect to and do things on. So you normally don't install it on the same machine as your web server. You install it on some other machine that can connect to it. And for most Drupal setups, the default and easiest way to make it connect to various different machines is via SSH and SSHing to them. There is another way, which is you can have like a child Jenkins running on that machine that is listening to the master ones. And then jobs are what it runs, sometimes also called tasks. And then the results it calls a build because of its original use for desktop creation. And if that job creates files like logs, or perhaps you have a backup and the file it creates is a SQL dump, or you have a test and the file it creates is an XML of test results, you can attach those to the jobs that ran, and those are called artifacts. And so that's mainly useful when you're looking through the Jenkins documentation. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk through installing it and setting up some basic security and some example logs and stuff. And to do that, I'm going to switch computers, I think. One of the reasons why I wanted to do it is because I wanted to actually show it being installed and show that it was easy. But I also didn't want to hold up the whole our whole presentation while something downloaded. So what I actually did is before this presentation, I ran these commands and installed it. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to type history, and you're going to see the previous few commands I installed. And then I'm going to go to the web page and show you where I found this documentation and so on. So, so these last 5 commands from the wget onward are what installed Jenkins and got me a running Jenkins. And you don't have to write those down or anything. And the proof that it got me a running Jenkins is here. Let me make my browser smaller and move it over to that window. So I went, after running those commands, I went to localhost 8080, and this is the welcome page of the current version of Jenkins. And so one thing to note is that this is the first thing that came up. I didn't type any password to get into this or whatever. So you know, before running that on a live server with production, let's kick to the internet, you should know about the other ways to set it up. This is where I got those commands from, which is on the Jenkins homepage. And what I did is I just went down here and I clicked on the Ubuntu Debian and I cut and pasted those commands. And as you can see, it covers a lot of other different different operating systems. And because of its background, it came out of Sun when they were managing the Open Office project originally. So it covers things like Solaris and things like that. And so let's go back to our actual page here. This touchpad is kind of finicky. Here we go. So you come into here, and this is the first thing you see. And so I'm going to go into Manage Jenkins, and there's this Configure Global Security link, and so you know it contains this checkbox I always make fun of, which says Enable Security, which you know maybe should be checked automatically. But the reason why it's not is because most people who run this always install it like inside their system, and it only SSHs out to other servers. Like nothing really connects to it. But you probably have to be on a VPN or even physically go there to have access to it. So it's not as a as big a deal as it seems. So once you check it, you know, kind of like Drupal single sign-on options, like it has a ton of ways you can secure it. What I usually do is I check this user group database, and if you do that, then you essentially use the same accounts you would log in as a shell to log in. And so that will be a problem if you have your server set up so you can only log in with an SSH key because you need a password to do it. But and it has a little test button here because I think often you have to add you have to do a step where you add a group here, and we'll just do that. And I probably could have done that beforehand, but I wanted to kind of show all the I did want to kind of show all the different you know, little finicky steps, that there weren't that many really. And there are better ways to add users to Jenkins, but that's to manage groups. And so there's a Jenkins job, and I'm going to restart it because I just added that group. And so you can see that like Apache and other things, it's just a daemon running on your system. And let me jump back to here. I'll reload this. And it brings you back to here, so I should be able to do tests. It says success. So if I save this now what I'm going to have to do is log back in with my user. Note that you can also make it use a MySQL database. And so the default authorization is anyone can do anything, which is also not good. So I'm going to say at least logged in users can do anything. And even that is not fully protecting you because although they can't do something, an anonymous user would be able to see a lot of details about the jobs that were done. So keep that in mind too. And I'm going to hit apply here, save to just to be sure. And now it decides to kick me to a login. Actually, different password on this command. And why did it do that? This is partly why I kept the other one with an already working Jenkins that we could do the rest on if we got stuck. And it did log me in for some reason. So I have not actually done, I have not actually run this demo on this version of Jenkins. It was released lately, so it may have a bug in it. So so this is Jenkins. We've now added this. You can add and configure various people. There is a credentials place to handle those SSH things that SSH to various places. But just to get the basic demo, we're going to create a new job, which would be the same as this new item up here. It used to be actually labeled new job. This is something that would regularly run. And I'm just going to call it, why don't we call it demo? I'll call it demo LS since that's what I'm going to run. For everything that we would do, we would always do the free software style project and click OK here. And so, so it has some fields here. And I'm going to run through these checkboxes and kind of describe what they are and expose some old things. So it keeps a log of everything you do, but you can make it discard things after a certain amount of time. But I'll just leave that unchecked for now. But for example, if you had a job that was deploying something to prod, you might make it archive everything, so you could always sort of justify yourself to a client and say, no, I didn't change something. This build is parameterized. That's kind of interesting. You can make it so that when you run something by hand, it gives you a form. You have to fill in some details. So you could make it where it's a deploy, but you have to put in the domain name of your customer on your hosting thing or something. You can disable it and so on. The concurrent builds means that if one is still running and then something triggers it to run again, whether it will run at the same time or not. The advanced projects options, the only one here that's of interest is the Workspace, because that is the directory in which something runs. And so you can configure that for a lot of Drupal sites. It'll be var www, in the doc root of your site, because you're going to want to run drush commands there, but not necessarily. And there's the source code management here, which right now does not include the Git the Git repo that most of us use. That's because that's a plugin that we'll add. These build triggers are important. If you use build periodically, you can essentially use this as a cron job and run it on a set time. Any source code management option you set here, you can then set it to, if you go to pull SCM, you can give it a GitHub repo or a Git repo or something else, and tell it that when there's a change to this repo or this branch, execute this job. And that's kind of the key to the whole more complicated DevOps of dev prod stage and automatically doing things, is that you can make jobs that are triggered by your code changes. And then here are the things that it actually does. So all up here is like where it kept logs and what causes it to run. And there's an add build step here. And I'm just going to do execute shell, which means that it actually will run these commands on whatever server Jenkins logs in to run it. And so I'm going to put in the command pwd, which shows you what directory you're in. I'm going to put in the command who am I, which in Linux shows you what user you are. And I'll do ls-l and show everything in this directory. And then I'm going to do save. And so now we're looking at this job. This is a little pull down of all these jobs. And there's a build now, which means run this job. And I'm going to click it, and let's see what happens. Did it really click or not? It did. I actually clicked it twice. So there's a build history here. And each time I click this is that log I was referring to, where it keeps track of all the times that I ran something. It has a red ball next to it, which means that something is not working, but I can go to the console output of each one of those attempts to run that script, and it shows me what it actually did. And so whether that red ball is red or is red or blue is controlled just by if the shell script returns 1 or 0. So if you're writing a custom shell script and you have tests, for instance, that's how you control whether the test is passing or not. The problem is I misspelled who am I. So I'll go back, I'll go to configure, and it's who am I, not whom am I. Who, is that right? Right. So that's save and apply. And if you click apply, the message says saved. It has a lot of funky UX things. And so now I'm going to click build now again. And so this time it shows a blue item, and it ran successfully. And I do want to point out a couple of things about its output. So this is the default workspace. So this pwd shows you the directory on the machine where it went to run things. This shows you the user that it ran as. So it's running as a user Jenkins by default. And you can override all of these things. So you could make it change just another user. And by default, there's nothing in the directory. So we could override what's in the directory by hooking it up to a GitHub repo, and it would update that GitHub repo and update what's in that workspace every time. You could also tell it to blow away the workspace every time and start fresh. You can change what user it is. You can change what machine it's on by telling it to connect to a particular worker. But this I think sort of captures basically what Jenkins is doing. Like, it's this graphical tool that lets you specify commands that will run triggered on various things. And now if I go to the front page, it shows me a list of all the jobs I did. It has tabs here, and I can hit plus and organize them. So this blue ball on my job indicates that the last time it ran, it was successful. They have this column called weather, and the fact that it indicates a rainy cloud means that on average it's failing, because it failed 3 times before I fixed that bug. And if you hover over it, you see it shows a little build stability thing. One of the funky things people do with Jenkins is there are various plugins which change that. Like a popular one is to have it be a little icon of Chuck Norris, and he gets angrier and angrier the more your jobs fail. So the next thing I'm going to do is go through all the plugins that are available for Jenkins, and then I'm going to switch back to a actual install Jenkins and where some jobs are already configured and go through some more complex ones. But at this point, are there like kind of any questions? It should be possible for you to install Jenkins on your laptop and hook it up to whatever Drupal project you're working on now and have it do something every time that project changes. And I'm not going to pretend like you could do it as fast as I can give this presentation, because you're going to run into little funky things and have to Google search around and ask an IRC and so on. But you could definitely do it inside an afternoon. And that's, yes?
Just a quick question. Is it doing it as user Jenkins, or is it doing it as you, or is it doing it as root?
In this case, it's running those jobs as user Jenkins. Root, there was that command prompt I was showing you as root. That was root because that's where I installed Jenkins. And you can make it switch to any user if it has the right credentials, obviously. So I guess it's common that, say, for some jobs like backups, you might run it as a privileged user. And for other jobs like a deploy, you may have a particular user that deploys that particular website. Like if you have a single server and each one of your clients has a different Unix user on it, it may have to log in as that user for each one. In fact, I'll let that lead into clicking on this credentials thing. And if you, where's the add credentials? Add domain. They're changing things around. I think I need to add the SSH plugin, but the credentials link is where you would add an SSH key to make it SSH to a particular machine as a particular user. And even if I want, so the way I usually do it, just because I know how to configure it that way and it's fast, is I actually make it SSH to localhost as that user if I wanted to make it switch users. You don't have to do that, but I sort of trust that more than whatever the Jenkins guys did as a plugin to make it switch users. Just because that's, kind of very, very standard. Let's go to Jenkins and let's go to Manage Jenkins. And there's a bunch of things in here that are all like fun to look at. There's that Manage Credentials. I want to go to where the plugins are. And so there's various stuff about configuring the system and so on. So that's not the plugins. That's like the equivalent of the site settings in Drupal. Manage plugins, there we are. And so this is useful to look in through because I think, so one of the good things I look at this is just to see how long all this stuff is. Like so these are updates to things that were built in, kind of the equivalent of the core Drupal. And if you click on available here, like the page goes on for a long, long ways. And every kind of thing, like here's SCP and SCP and so on, every kind of thing you imagine where you could put a file, it has a plugin that will connect to it, like there's one for Dropbox and everything. Here's authentication and user management. So every kind of way you can imagine you might want to have people log into Jenkins is there. So it's like going to Drupal.org and browsing single sign-on modules. LDAP, Kerberos, etc. So build notifiers has, I think it's kind of funny because it's like almost a history of every single chat server that has been popular for any amount of time, has had a Jenkins plugin built for it so people could get an instant message when a build failed. There's email, obviously, but then you see HipChat there, and a lot of things that were flash-in-the-pan.coms that never ever came out. But then there's stuff like RabbitMQ, which is a generic queuing system. And there's these build reports, and these are the things that sort of aggregate the total amount of data over time of how your build is doing. They can generate like nice graphs, for instance, of how many simple tests failed with each build. And you can see a red line going up and down. And I'm kind of going through at random here, but the point I want to get to is not any particular one of these, is that if you can think of something you want, Jenkins to listen to or to put stuff out to or to trigger on, it's probably already in there. Like, you do not have to go in and like make a custom shell script that SSHs somewhere and cats a file or something like that. And I see it also as being what some of the Jenkins and Drupal, I feel like, are both very complex projects that kind of evolved in the same way. They're both hard to manage, all the plugins and what conflicts with each other. And another way in which they're similar is both of them, when you go into roles and permissions, you get this ridiculous giant matrix of checkboxes that you have to kind of scroll around in, and it's like incomprehensible to understand if you have too many people and too many roles. And they both kind of ended up in the same place that way. So with that, let me actually iconify that. And one last thing I want to do is I want to show you on the file system what Jenkins did. My last command is off the screen here. There we go. So it installed everything into varlib Jenkins, and that's sort of its home directory. And I'm going to do less on a file in there called config.xml. And if we look down in there, this contains all the main checkboxes that I did when I was installing it. So the use security true, that was that checkbox and everything. So it's all saved in a big XML file, so it's easy to back this up and replicate it. And you can put this directory in Git and actually version it, and that works. And then, so the plugins are installed in plugins, as you would imagine. And then there's this directory called Jobs, and that's the other one that that you might be interested in from a point of like backups and so on and managing your own system. And so that has a directory for that job I created, and it will have a directory for every single one. And if I go into the directory for the job, it has its own config.xml that represents all the checkboxes associated with it. The builds directory is that little log off to the side of every build and whether it's successful or not. So we can do a list of that. And let's just briefly look at its config.xml just to kind of confirm. And so it's also a text file, so we can also keep it in Git and back it up normally. And then there's the workspace, and that's where there's nothing in it now, but that's where it would keep its files and so on over time. The last stable and last successful things you see there, those are just links to those particular builds, which it uses to figure out the little cloud health thing and so on. And so I think that's all I'm going to cover on this one. I'm going to switch back to my other laptop, which has some default stuff set up. And the reason why is I have a GitHub of a set of default jobs that are kind of already set up to install Drupal and copy databases and so on. And they make a good starting point. What you would do is you would check that out and copy those jobs into this directory and restart Jenkins, and then you would have those jobs. And I think that idea is there is to get those jobs good enough that you can't just install Jenkins. We can actually get it managing your project in a relatively short amount of time. Any questions or comments at this point? Let me do the little switcheroo here. So we just did our little walkthrough of that general background stuff. This bad drawing, I think is like not as necessary at this point in time. When I first started giving this talk, it was often necessary to kind of explain to people the whole flow of dev, prod, and stage, and why you would want different servers at all or different doc routes at all. And this is a badly scaled attempt at that I used to talk to. Is there anybody here who doesn't kind of have that? I can give have that general concept of development, a stage or testing, and then a production environment. I guess the key is that developers do stuff on developer environments kind of at whatever they want. This staging is they push code up to it, and by using features and update hooks, we don't want to ever copy databases upwards. The reason why is because they're kind of monolithic and they would stomp over everything anybody else copied up. And so only code flows up the chain. And then meanwhile on live, there's a site owner or people posting comments or so on who are adding things to the database. And so periodically you want to copy that downwards so that people are working off of recent copies of all the site settings and everything. And so now I'm gonna just walk through some actual jobs that do each one of these steps. And that I have installed on here. Let's get out of that. So how does that look in terms of size? Maybe we need to increase it a little bit, as much as it will go. So this is an install where I've copied that set of jobs. Actually, I should probably show you that set of jobs at this point. It's going to be hard to look at two screens here. So I have this link. This probably isn't the end place where this will live on forever, but it is essentially a GitHub repo of the jobs directory. So you can check this out, copy them into that jobs directory, and I have a note here that on most machines I found, on some Linux distros you didn't, but I had to do a change ownership of the jobs directory to be the Jenkins user. But if you drop these files in there, you'll get and restart Jenkins, then you get to this page automatically. And so it automatically creates all these jobs. As you can see, I've been screwing around with it. So some of them have red and blue and so on. That's from being run. And so what I'd like to do is I'm gonna pick two of these and go through their options really fast, like in 5 minutes. I kind of point out what I checkboxed, and then unless maybe there's one in particular you guys want to see, like one that deploys code automatically or human triggered or something. I think if I show the backup DBs one, that just runs a script, so that's like very easy and shows you the basics. And then if I click on the I'll click on that deploy stage coffee IV one, and it'll show updating a site based off a GitHub trigger. And I think those will be two good backups. I'm keeping in mind that it's that we have about 15 minutes or so on before we break and go into the next one. So I don't want to, I want to be economical with our time, particularly if people have questions about a particular thing. All right, let's take a look at the backup DBs one. So I'm going to click on that job. You see here its history. And you can see from the dates here that it's actually currently running, and I'm not logged in. So that brings back a thing I mentioned, is that by default, even if you're not logged in, you can actually see a lot more than you might anticipate. You don't want to leave this like open to the internet without checking it. But let me log in. And what I'm logging in is with the same password I would log in like to a shell account on here. So now because I'm logged in, I have more options here, just like a Drupal site showing you more menu options because you have permissions. And I want to go to configure and show you how I built this particular job. And so this one's very much like the LS one. It has discard old builds because it runs too often. I don't want to fill up my disks. I have the GitHub plugin installed, so I have an optional GitHub project here which is not filled in. And I don't have it connected to any source code management. I do have it checked to build periodically, so it's not a code change that triggers this one, it's just time. And you can put cron style formats in here. The H whatever thing that you're seeing there, that's a way of making it kind of randomize its cron job, so it's going to pick an hour between 0 and 3. And it's a good best practice because it keeps all your cron jobs from piling up at one instance. And then the shell command is a really stupid, simple database backup command. And so if for all these databases, except for this one that I back up separately, it does these things. So because I checked this out from my example one, the password is XXX because I didn't want to put my MySQL password in GitHub. And then it just checks these things out, and it copies the tar.gz to a place, and then this find command deletes the ones that are older than 10 days. And that's a simple Unix backup script you could find from anywhere. I will mention that on a lot of people's Jenkins setups, they never put anything like really this complicated in the Jenkins thing. They would put that in a separate shell script, and you would see like run op / backup.sh, and that's the only line you would see in the Jenkins. Let's just go to a recent run of this and look at the console output. And for some reason it wants me to log in or something. No, it's going to show it to me. And so you see started by timer and it running these commands. So with not very much time left, I want to go to a deploy one. This has never actually run, but it's actually currently disabled, as you can see. And the key here is this GitHub project. So I attached it to a particular GitHub project, and down here where it has the Git repositories, there is a particular URL, and you can also make it connect to a particular branch if you want by going into the advanced. Here's branches to build, it says */master there. And that's what enables this to be triggered when I push new code to that place on GitHub. And the low-level mechanism, the way this does this, because it's on my laptop, obviously GitHub can't find my IP address because I'm behind a NAT and router and so on, is in this case Jenkins actually pulls GitHub. You can, if you set up your Jenkins in a single place on some server in your infrastructure, configure your GitHub repo with a callback URL, and then it doesn't have to pull, and GitHub will reach out to you and run a URL when something has changed. In the advanced options, This is an ancient example, I see, because it has a custom workspace on a site I haven't worked on for 4 years. But that would be the directory, which was essentially, the way I usually set up, that's the directory that's either the doc root or one directory out from where the doc root is. But instead of running in that varlib Jenkins jobs, job name, workspace, it's now telling it to run all the commands inside that particular place. And the final thing is here is my deploy thing is as sort of simple as I could make it. I purposely made it simple so to not be intimidating. It doesn't, put varnish into grace mode or do anything like that. It just sets a maintenance mode. It does a git pull, which grabs a new copy of the code off of GitHub, and it runs update DB with the -y, so it automatically run everything. And it runs a features revert all, which isn't necessarily what you want to do on every project, but in this case it does. It clears the cache, which is redundant. Update DB does that, and takes it back out of maintenance mode. And you could make this more complicated as well as more robust. Like most modern deployment people would check out the code and build it in one place and then move a symlink to point to the current build or something like that. But this will work for I don't know, it works for most of the projects I do that aren't official projects. And that's kind of it. So there's a Git publisher thing down at the bottom there. Each time it builds, it can automatically make a tag that has the date in it. That's like, here's when we deployed. And you can make that push back up to GitHub. That means that you can now from inside GitHub, say, I'm looking at this bug report from 2 weeks ago, and this person said that they couldn't do this on an order, but I can do it now. What if I get the code from 2 weeks ago? Is it a bug that was fixed between that? It gives you that ability to log what was on there. And with that, seeing how we're basically almost out of time, I'm going to, so I have some remaining slides, which I'm going to go through in super speedy way. And they mainly just cover sort of general things we went over talking already, some principles of DevOps, for things like search indexing in particular, and say occasional content migrations if you have a feed that's supposed to update once a week and that kind of stuff. I find it very, very useful to make those via drush command, run those via Jenkins, because it collects and archives the logs better. And it also, because it doesn't run via Apache, it kind of pulls this one process, which might use an unusual amount of RAM, kind of out of there. And then I put this in there. I'd like to put this in all my slides, but a lot of people make backups and they never test to see that they can get stuff back out of them. And I have been guilty of that and been burned on it more than once. I have a thing in here about automated testing, but I feel that's such a giant topic. I can't really fit it into a talk on Jenkins, and it's a little bit more than you can do in an afternoon, so it's kind of a lie to put it in a Jenkins in an afternoon thing. This is something I recently discovered, even though it's been around for more than a year. So there was that REST API to Jenkins. Actually, when I was showing it to you, I meant to click on a link and actually show you the endpoints there. But regardless, it's a nice REST API. You can trigger it to run a job. You can trigger it to get the last build, whether or not it was successful. All the things you could do through the web page, you can do through a REST API. And there is a Drupal module that exposes all that back to Drupal. So if you wanted to have, say, a Drupal site, which was your master site that knew the status of all your other sites, and you wanted it to be able to show the most recently updated sites or something like that, it's relatively easy to put that together, and it even has rules integration. So from a point and click kind of way, you could essentially move a lot of that logic in Jenkins of this goes up and this goes down and what job triggers what other jobs, and you could pull that into a Drupal setup if that made more sense for you. And so my main summary is that don't be intimidated by this. Like, you can install Jenkins and kind of get the first 2 or 3 things in there, like backups, cron, and automatically downloading a new database without having to log into prod and stuff like that. Things that will save you a decent amount of time and keep you from making mistakes in particular. So the main goal is not so much time, but to save the time from fixing mistakes. And you can get that set up, like, relatively easily. Like, I think there's a lot of hype around DevOps and things, and there are people advertising themselves as DevOps experts who are kind of making a lot of this look more black magic than it is. And it can really professionalize your operation. In that, one of the things that I found is that inevitably I mess up. If I can show a client that log of the jobs, and I can kind of say, look, here's where the code deployed that broke all the ads on the site, and then like 2 days later we realized that here's where I deployed it and fixed it, and then I'm going to try to write a test for them that would automatically alert on that. Somehow seeing that log in Jenkins and those logged actions, makes it look like you're not just a slob working out of his basement or something. People are willing to forgive a lot of mistakes if it looks like you're on top of it and you're keeping track of stuff. And it can turn a situation which is kind of like you're fired into, well, you messed up, but you're probably doing a better job than I would do. Try to do better next time. And I think that's it. So we're just a few minutes from the next session, so we should break here. But if anybody has any questions or anything, come on up.